Hey guys, how's it going? This is Leo here. Maybe you know me as Leo Main. I've played a lot of card games competitively in the past. The most notable one is Hearthstone, where for many years I was the best player, one of the best players, in Latin America, in Brazil, you know. I've already won a championship in Korea, and I made it to the top 8 in the World Championship qualifier. Overall, I also did really well in other card games, like Legends of Runeterra, or even other strategy games, and so on. Yeah, Hearthstone was definitely where I stood out the most, and it has a lot of similarities with Parallel. In this first batch of videos I'm making, I'm going to talk about these creator decks and some general things about card games that I think are really valuable, okay? To start off here, we're going to have Feno's creator deck, Core. First, we're going to do a review of the cards in the deck, okay? And it's really important to mention, I recommend that for this video, you should have already played the tutorial and basically know how the game's mechanics work. Then I'll talk a bit about what the cards in the deck are like, what the deck is trying to do, and I'll play a game or two and explain the strategy behind the deck and give some tips about the game. Alright. So let's get started. This here is Feno's deck. It uses this character here. How does it work? When you start the game, you come in with 4 counters, and at the end of your turn, you remove 1 counter, okay? In other words, and when the last counter is removed, you get to choose to create a Harriet to put into play. You enter the game, and at the end of turn 4, you're going to put one of these on the table, and after that, every 3 turns, you'll put another one, right? I'm going to explain to you more or less how each of these cards works. They're what make the deck good, okay? Yeah, the rest of the deck is more of a complement, but what will really let you build a big advantage are these here. The first Harriet you have is the Attack Harriet, which is Armana, which is the keyword that says the following. When you attack another opponent's unit with her, she, your unit, Harriet, won't take any damage, okay. If she gets attacked, she'll take normal damage, but otherwise she won't. Yeah, the other one we have is the 4/3/6 Defender, which in the case of Defender, as you probably already know, when one of your other units is attacked and not her, you can choose to use her for the combat instead. Yeah, the next card we have is Harriet the Artillery, which is a 2/5, and when she enters the field, she deals 2 damage to a target unit. So she's each one of them has a specific role, right? You'll see this in the game I'm going to play later, but basically, when you already have board control, and I'll talk about this during the game, I recommend you watch a video I'm going to record about general card game knowledge and some specific points, so you can understand some of the terms I'm explaining. But when you already have board control, meaning you're ahead, you have things on the board that are already controlling what's happening in front of your opponent, you'll probably choose the Attack Harriet because she'll give you an even better chance to snowball, since she really helps you with board control by letting you take out your opponent's creature without taking damage, and that way, you can stabilize even more. If the board is more balanced, you'll most likely choose the Defensive Harriet, since she has the best stats of all, and she has Defender. In other words, if your opponent has a creature that can attack, you probably won't want the Attack Harriet, because your opponent will just use their creature to attack yours, and you'll lose your 4 force without much impact, right? The Defensive Harriet, however, if you add up the attack and defense, right here it's 8, the Defensive Harriet has 3, 6, 9. But she doesn't have Vigilance, and she has Defender. So if your opponent is going to be able to attack, or if you want to protect one of your creatures, the Defensive Harriet is the best option, usually when things are tied. And lastly, we have the Artillery Harriet, which is a 2/6, and when it enters, you deal 2 damage to a target unit your opponent controls. It's really good when you can finish off a key creature of your opponent's, or usually in cases when you're behind on the board and you're not looking for stats, but rather trying to recover a bit so you don't take as much damage. So you use this against an aggro deck to kill a key creature that's been hitting you a lot, or to protect one of your own creatures, okay? Most of the deck works like this. These are good cards, but you'll need to get value out of them for things to work. Compared to other decks where the character you have is more of a support to help you win, rather than actually being what makes things work, you know? With this one, you don't have to devote any kind of resource. It's always going to be giving you resources as you play the cards in the deck. So, It's really important to pay attention to that, like, should I rush the opponent or control the board? This deck here is more of a mid-range deck, okay? Leaning towards control. So what is mid-range, right? I'll talk about it in more depth in another video, but it's a deck that can do both roles. It can be more aggressive against control decks. It's easier for it to take on that role, but it also has the ability to play control when needed, which is usually against more aggressive decks. Okay. Let's start with the deck by looking at the lowest cost cards, alright? So, first we have the Artifact Appraiser. It costs 1, it's a 1-2, and as long as you control a relic, it gets +2, +0. One very important thing that I'll talk about later is how you do the mulligan right. What is the mulligan? It's the selection of cards when you get your starting hand, where you choose which cards you'll keep for your opening hand, right? So, in the case of the Artifact Appraiser, it's really good. It has really good stats when you have a relic, right? In other words, it's a 1-mana 3/2, but when you don't have a relic, it's a bit below average, because a creature that costs 1 and is a 2/2, the vanilla one that's available, will be able to trade with it for free, and you'll lose value very easily. So, it's not a card you're usually looking to play on its own, okay? You can usually keep it in your hand if you're on the play. If you're on the draw, if you're going second, I don't think it's really worth it, okay? The next one we have is the PS8 launcher, which deals damage to the target unit. It's great, cheap, and lets you control the early game against creatures with low toughness or finish off damage at the end of the game. It's a card I would always keep in my opening hand, okay? Yeah, I'm not sure how many copies. You'll have to decide based on your opponent's hero, but it's definitely a very good card. We have the AZ-12 Target Marker. At the beginning of the turn, you choose an opponent, one of their creatures, and then when you attack it, it will take 1 extra damage. Okay. It's usually good later on. For example, if you play this on turn 1 and then this on turn 2, it'll make it easier for you to deal damage. Alright? Yeah, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it also combos with this here. We'll see as we play our games, but I'm pretty sure it does. Lastly, for the 1-cost cards, we have the Mercenary Gunslinger, which costs 1 and is a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to any target. Just like this one here, it's a really good card, but it's a bit worse in comparison because its stats aren't great and it only deals 1 damage. But given the options, since this is a deck that's trying to gain board control to snowball with the character's ability that brings in the battering rams, it's still a card that's worth using, okay? Not that we could really choose, since it's the creator's deck, right? But anyway. Yeah, come on, it costs 2. We have Alvaro's Interrogator. He's here much more because of his stats, okay? The effect itself isn't the reason, since you're trying to be aggressive and you don't have many effects. Well, actually, we do have effects, like this one here, for example. Yeah, but it's really more because he has great stats to help you control the board, okay? Most of the time, the effect is actually more of a problem than an advantage, alright? It's pretty rare that you're trying to rush your opponent and finish them off as quickly as possible, because usually you're going to gain the upper hand as the game goes on, since you'll keep getting value from your character's ability, right? We have the Cunning Diplomat. Very good. Yeah, he's usually good when you already have something you want to protect, whether it's the Artifact Appraiser himself so you have time to play a relic, or even the AZ-12 Target Marker, okay? We have the Weapon Barge. How does it work? If I have let's say, the Artifact Appraiser, and then I have this here, when the Artifact Appraiser attacks, I'll deal 2 damage to any target, which is really good. Yeah, if you have creatures that attack, it's going to give you a lot of value, okay? It's one of the cards that will really guarantee you that value. Yeah, it also works really well with a Clever Diplomat because it protects her while you get some kind of boost to be able to attack, right? We have the Drone Printer, which is our first relic that will help our dear Relic Inspector, okay? Generally, I wouldn't keep this card alone in my hand, okay? Yeah, if I'm curving out and already have a 1 and 2 cost card, then I'd keep it. Otherwise, no, because a 3 cost is too late, and what it does isn't that impactful, okay? So how does it work? The first time you create a token on your turn, you draw a card. What is a token, okay? A token can be any of these, whether it's the drones that this card itself creates, or even your character's tokens. For example, when he summons the battering ram, he generates one of those. You can use it. Spend 2 mana to create a 1/1 token, and in this case, while you have this relic, you'll draw a card, so it keeps giving you value on its own. Or you can pay 5 mana to create an attack drone, which costs 5 and is a 6/6, okay? So, it's basically a card that won't give you immediate value right away, okay? When you play it, you'll be losing some tempo on the board in terms of board control. But it's a card that will give you a lot of value in the long run, because you'll draw a lot of cards, and you'll always have ways to spend your mana efficiently. Of course, 2 mana for a 1/1 creature isn't much, but if you don't have anything else to spend that mana on, it's better to have a 1/1 than nothing at all, right? So, it's really good in that sense. It's one of the cards that makes the deck work, okay? You get a lot of value from this card. Even so, I wouldn't always keep it, because the challenge with this deck isn't generating value, since you already get a lot from your character. You get value through, well, you get access to this extra value. It's a mana sink, as we call it, where you can dump all your leftover mana, but the real value you already get from your character just by surviving. So what you're really looking for are ways to buy yourself time to survive, rather than relying on this card specifically. Of course, if I already have the Artifact Appraiser, that's a card I'll always want to keep in hand to have that synergy. Next up, we have the Ruins Inventor. When it enters the battlefield, it creates a 1/1 token. And at the end of each turn, you can exile a card from a graveyard to create a 1/1 token. It's important to note that these decks are good on their own, you know? The cards are good by themselves, but a lot of the cards the creators put in here, I'm not sure, but I believe it's because of the meta, okay? Yeah, removing cards from the graveyard is usually good against certain specific decks. Regardless, this card is good because it costs 3. It's a 1/1, and when it enters, it creates a 1/1 token. And even if you exile a card from someone's graveyard and it doesn't, give you value, it already enters. For example, if there's a card in someone's graveyard, you make 3 1/1s, which is already decent value. Not to mention that since it creates a token, you'll also get card draw interaction with drone printers, right? And every turn, he will keep placing cards while you draw cards. So Ruins Inventor is good too. Yeah, next, at 3 mana, we have Miesman, which got nerfed. It used to be a 3/3. Yeah, when it enters, all keywords are deactivated. Yeah, and the grouping ability, which triggers when it enters the battlefield, and the offensive ability, which triggers when it takes damage and does something, aren't activated on the next turn. This card is really powerful, but it's also really hard to play with, okay? For those of you watching this video, I don't really know what your skill level in the game is, but this card is really good, for example, when you're playing a mirror match in this game. What does that mean? One of the most broken cards in the game is this one right here. For example, Ingrid, the right hand. When she comes into play, she basically wins the game. I'm not going to read everything because I'll get to her eventually, but she's extremely, extremely powerful. So when you're in this mirror match of all going core, when you get to turn 8, you know your opponent is going to have 2 grouping cards that are really powerful. So if you manage to play Miasmanti, and the guy has this card in his hand, you might not even know it because he won't want to play it, but you'll be able to prevent, or at least delay by a turn, him from making a really strong play, which can be very useful for you, okay. So this card is much more about the meta. Like, as a baseline, if you don't know exactly what your opponent's deck is, here's the thing. If you're ahead on the board, you can play it because the cards that have the biggest impact when they come in to help someone get back on the board tend to be grouped together. So if you're winning and you already have your cards on the board, you've got board control, you can play it and it's a good move, okay? But in general, the best way to use it is if you know your opponent has a key card that's grouped together, so you can take advantage of that. Next up, we have the Saboteur, another card that's also more of a meta call, right? There are only 2 of them in the deck, while all the others we've talked about so far have 3. It's a card that you'll rarely use for its effect. It really depends a lot on the matchup you're in. In a mirror match, if you're facing someone using the same deck as you, the creator decks, you should wait until your opponent sets up the drone printer before destroying their relic, okay? About the mulligan, like I was saying before, with the 1-cost cards, I almost always keep all of them, alright? Yeah, it's really rare not to keep the 1-cost card, unless I have multiples of the same one. If you have 2 or more, then you start thinking about getting rid of the second one. The PSO8 launcher is one that, even if I have 2, I'd still keep both, okay? As for the 2-cost cards, the Astute Diplomat, if I don't have any other 1-cost cards, I wouldn't keep it. But the Interrogator, I'd always keep, alright? A 2/2 3-cost cur can give you a good cur. For the 3-cost cards, I'd only keep this one if I already had a lower cost card, otherwise I wouldn't keep it. I'd only keep the Drone Printer if I had the Artifact Appraiser. As for the Ruins Inventor, if I already have a low cost card to make sure there's something in the graveyard when it comes in, then that's fine, okay? Yeah, I would never keep the Miasman in any hand, and I'd only keep the Saboteur if I was on the play, okay? Only if I knew my opponent was this one, right here. Next, we have the Black Market Agent. This card is really powerful. It's great for turning the game around, right? Like I said, these cards with group effects usually have a big impact when it comes to regaining control of the board. In other words, against aggro decks, as you can see, our curve is a bit higher compared to aggro decks, so you're going to struggle a lot until you reach the late game. So on turn 4, what are you usually going to play? You're going to play this creature. Take out one of your opponent's creatures that was controlling the board, and drop a ram, and hopefully that'll be enough to even out the board so you can start coming back with your more powerful, higher cost cards, okay? I would never keep it, okay? Unless you already have a perfect curve, like a 1-drop, a 2-drop, a 3-drop, but otherwise you should always be trying to improve your hand for those early turns, which are the toughest for this deck, alright. Next, we have the Crew Chief, which gives your other creatures +1/+1. I also would never keep it in my opening hand, okay? But it's a very good card. When it comes into play, if you have other creatures on the board, it can give you a lot of value, okay? So it's really good. Then we have Ong, which starts to get into the most powerful cards in the deck, alright? These cards that cost 5 or more usually have a huge impact on the board. Here's how this one works. When it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 5 cards of your deck, you choose any number of them with different types, and you put each of the remaining ones at the bottom of your deck. The ones you chose, you put into your hand, and Ong gets +1/+1 for each card you drew. And if you pay attention, there are a lot of different card types in the deck. We have units, we have effects, we have, where is it here? Yeah, relics. So usually, you're going to be able to draw 3, okay, or 4 if you're really lucky, because getting a 4th type is really hard. But if you draw 3, which I think is about average, even if it's just 2, it costs 5, 6, 6. Drawing 2 cards is insane, okay? So, this is one of the powerhouse cards. The sooner you can play it, the better, because you'll get more value out of it, to make things happen. The plus or minus one it gives isn't for itself, but it's distributed, so the value is actually even better, because when it comes in, maybe the plus or minus one you give already impacts the board right then. Next, we have the Idanian Hammer. It's more of a late game card, okay? Yeah, when you're already winning the game, it comes in, it has battle readiness, so when it enters, you're already going to take out a creature. It helps you recover the board a bit, but in itself, there's nothing about it that's overpowered. It's just another removal to get rid of your opponent's creature and maintain board control, but it's more of a late game card, something you play when you have a lot of mana, And finally, the 2 best cards in the deck, which are as follows. This one, when it enters, if your deck only has universal cards, which in this case, it does, obviously, to use it. Yeah, for each universal card you have on the field, you pick one of the available options, okay? So, you can choose to draw 4 cards, deal 4 damage to any target, give a unit +4/+4, recover 4 life, or play a unit with energy cost 4 or less from your discard pile. So when you play this card, you're going to do it all. Cover all the bases and then some, alright? It depends on how many you have on the board, but she's really powerful. At worst, she'll only trigger one effect. If your board is empty, it'll just be her. And it costs 8 4. She comes in, deals 4 damage to a creature. That's already good. If it's 8 cost 4, deals 4 damage to a creature, gives +4/+4. That's really good. She keeps getting better and better each time. Bringing back a creature that costs 4 or less to the game is really good with the Parallel Market Agent, okay? With her, you can play her, bring in a 2 halves, and take out an opponent's 2-cost creature, so she's pretty useful too. And lastly, we have Ingrid, who, just like before, Your starting deck contains only universal cards. For each universal card you have on the field, select one that hasn't been chosen yet, right? So, in this case, you can choose for your opponent to discard 2 cards. You can take control of one of their creatures, one with power equal to or less than this unit, meaning 5 or less. Create a copy of the last card you played, except for herself, right? And finally, create and add 2 random cards to your hand. Notice that these 2 cards here were nerfed, okay? Before, they did all of this regardless of how many creatures were on the board. Now you need to have creatures for them to trigger their effect. Yeah, that was the nerf they made. Same thing with this one here. So before, it was much stronger, but it's still really good. Yeah, I would never keep any card that cost 5 or more, okay? I would only keep the parallel market agent if I had a really good curve. Alright, let's get into the game. Yeah, I didn't mention it at the start of the video, but I actually played with this deck quite a bit before. Yeah, I hit Diamond in parallel in about 10 hours playing with this deck, so that's why I know all this stuff. Here I'm going to be playing. My rank isn't very high, but I think it'll be good to give you guys a perspective on how the game strategy works. But the most important thing in a card game, I'll talk more about this in another video, is knowing what your win condition is. You need to go into the game knowing what the most likely path is for you to win with your deck, okay? Of course, every game situation is going to be different. For example, I might go up against a controlled deck and end up doing something different from my main win condition. But my main win condition, as I explained to you before, is to steal as much from the game as possible to get value, both from my character's ability and from the high-cost creatures I steal, those that cost 5 or more, okay? So, most of the deck is made up of cards that cost 4 or less. But that's just to buy you time to get there, not because those cards are going to win a game for you. The relic you might be able to win the game just from the amount of value it generates. But most likely you will win because your character keeps playing RAM and because of the high cost cards. Alright? Another important thing, and you'll get the hang of this over time, is being able to identify what deck your opponent is playing. Okay, I don't know the exact list for this guy here, but I know it's one of the decks. I believe it is, right? You can play this character with the clone deck, right? Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. So what does that mean in this case? Even so, our strategy would be to try to hold out as much as possible in the early game, but even more so against him. So, for example, I said I wouldn't keep too many one-cost cards in my hand, but against him, I would definitely keep every single one that comes up, okay? We started this turn, which isn't really ideal, okay? Usually, we want to go first. It's generally better because you have tempo, right? What is time? I'll have to explain that in another video, but being able to set the pace of the match is really useful. Okay, in this case here, look, I always keep 2 cost cards, right? Cost 1, I'll take both. And never ever, and never ever, and never ever. Case here, I'm thinking about whether I should keep parallel agent. What you should, I don't have time. I'm going to keep it, but I'll explain the thought process. Yeah, when you keep your hand, what you should be trying to do. Now there are 2 mulligans, that was A. Anyway, alright, I'm going to take out Ingrid because the cost is too high, so let's see. Alright, I got the relic. Okay. You should have a plan in your mind for what you're going to do. So, for example, on turn 1 I already know I'm going to do this here, and most likely after that, starting from the next turn, I'll be able to increase the damage dealt. I can use this here to kill a creature with 2 health, or play the 2/3 to keep my curve. On turn 3, in this case I drew this, but it would be to play this here and another card I drew, right? Yeah, in this case, he already played our artifact evaluator, so let's see what comes back to me. Yeah, since the guy's deck, if I'm not mistaken, is target based, this turn he can attack up to 3 units if I don't know what. So like, he has a lot of creatures, right? We know that. Alright, now we drew the artifact evaluator. I think I'm going to make a different play. I think I'm going to use the target marker as mana and play the artifact evaluator, right? The idea here is to be able to protect the artifact evaluator with the shield capsule until the relic comes up here. So what's the logic behind this deck? You generally want to put high cost cards that you're not going to use or that won't be useful in that match, okay? What does that mean? Basically, as much as possible, I want to be able to protect this card and not put it here. Why? It cost 8 and I'm not going to use it. Maybe I'll finish the game and never get to use it. So what's the logic behind that? I'm hoping, okay, that this card here will do a lot at the end. So, if I have another card option that won't hurt it, I'd rather play that one, right? Perfect. So, this is a great case to explain. Cost 2. I have this one here that would be really good right now. It costs 2, right? But I have a plan here, which is this. What was I going to do? I was going to use the 2-cost card as mana because then I could use both of my 1-cost cards to kill a guy's creature that has 2 health. I would attack with a relic attacker, deal 1 damage, so he would be left with just 1 creature and I'd have another, yeah, a relic. Next turn I'd have 3 mana, I'd play a relic and my relic would be a 3/2, so I could control the board better, right? And then after that I'd have the 4-cost card, so I'd have a more stable plan there. And the other option, instead of playing the 2-cost, would be to play the 8-cost, which I don't want to do for the reason I mentioned, which is that you want to save value, right? Of course, yeah, these plays are complicated because sometimes it's possible that even this 2-1-cost play would be better than, the other options I'm talking about, because you don't need, to play so many cards. The truth is, I don't know if you played Hearthstone, but in Hearthstone you only draw 1 card at the start of your turn, and you don't have to play cards to turn them into mana. In parallel, you draw at the start and end of your turn, but you have to play cards to turn them into mana. So, the card economy is a little different in the sense that you can be a bit more liberal with the number of cards you use. But if your deck wants to curve out, if it eventually wants to reach cost 8, like this one here, you have to be a bit careful with how many cards you're playing, right? So that's something to keep in mind as well. I'm going to play one more because that first one was really quick. Let's go! I imagine you all love this deck, right? In fact, I think it's one of the most popular decks out there, the clone deck. This deck here, in my opinion, when I was playing it, performed really well. But you have to be able to have a good early game. So you need to mulligan aggressively for the cards. Both the 1-cost that deals 2 damage, and the 2-cost, 2 out of 3. These are the cards that will usually, in a vacuum, take you further, okay? Alright, let's see who's going to start. We're starting the game. That's great for us. And let's see what our opening hand is. Well, like I said, with the opening hand, it's really important that we get some good early turns. Yeah, in this case, none of these cost. The only 2-cost card we have doesn't have any attack, so it doesn't really help us much. Card draw, effects that let you draw cards, are good, like bigger delayed rewards, right? This card, when you pay for it, creates a 0/3 token, which is really good when you have infinite mana. Let's think about strategy here, okay? So, I could do, this one costs 1, and then starting next turn, I can pick one of his creatures and deal 2 damage to it with this one. That's probably what I'm going to do. Yeah, the question is, what am I going to use to turn into mana? This card here is really versatile, so I don't want to give it up. Yeah, so it would be either this one or this one. The only way this one works is if this one stays alive. And I think the chances of that are pretty high, okay? So, considering that this one will be more valuable if it gets to attack than this one, I'm going to send this one over there and make the drone. Here, basically, what I'll have to do is, well, put the card I draw, probably, to turn into mana, depending on what it is, but that's most likely what's going to happen. Alright, this is the one we're going to kill, obviously. Alright, let's go. The effect here is that I choose a unit to take extra damage when it takes damage, so I'll choose this one here. I'm going to play another one of these because it would be too greedy to keep 2, and then I'll use this one to deal 1 damage, which will deal 1 extra damage because of the drone's effect. So click here. Confirm. And that was my turn, I'll pass. For example, this is going to be beautiful because what's going to happen, I'm going to choose this one here, right? Yeah, to take more damage. I'll use one of these to turn into mana and then play the weapon's barge. Next, any target. Alright. Then, I'll attack here with the mercenary gunslinger And when I do that, the weapon's barge will deal 2 damage, which will go to this one, but since the drone picked it, it'll deal 3 and that's it. Yeah, it's really important when you manage to attack. What are they setting up? Providing laws to learn. The guys are leaving, but I think you're getting the idea. Because I'll be totally honest, if you can get through this early game smoothly with this deck, you're going to win the late game, okay? It's very unlikely and rare for this deck not to win the late game, alright? I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Yeah, even though we didn't get to see much gameplay, I think you can still get a sense of the deck's power and understand a bit of what's going on. I recommend that if this is your first time watching this video and you haven't seen the others, you should actually play a bit with the deck and then rewatch, at least up to the start of the deck review, so you can better understand, even the things I'm talking about, okay? Yeah, I hope it works out. Good luck. That's it. Thanks.